Hi, and welcome to Building Resilience. The following is a conversation with Roger Martin. Roger is a trusted strategy advisor to the CEOs of companies worldwide, including Procter & Gamble, Lego, and Ford. In 2017, he was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. Roger is Professor Emeritus at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, where he also served as Dean. He is the author of A New Way to Think, Your Guide to Superior Managerial Effectiveness, and When More is Not Better. Our conversation is centered around the necessary balance between efficiency and resilience. Roger is sharing practical and actionable advice on how to become less vulnerable to efficiency, how to approach complexity, and intently design for the adaptations you want. Through this podcast, we are bringing resilience research and practice closer to you. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Your views and your feedback are extremely important to the development of the podcast. Enjoy our conversation. Hi, Roger, and welcome to Building Resilience.
Thank you, Yulia, for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
I have had a lot of fun reading your latest book, When More is Not Better. You start with a project led by the Martin Prosperity Institute, which is a 6 years project. And you start by discussing the interviews that you have with people and how they experience the economic life in the US. Can you just give me a bit more introspection and more information on the study and what are the highlights, how it was conducted, and what you have found?
Sure. Yeah. The study was a very ethnographic study where we went into in-depth interviews with people in sort of average jobs, if you will, across the U.S. economy. We didn't take anybody in the top about 15% of the income distribution, but everybody else, because we weren't particularly interested in how the richest Americans were faring, because the answer is pretty well, but everybody else. And the most kind of interesting finding to me was the degree to which they were perplexed. Right. So they were actually quite introspective, and they were saying, gee, I thought I was doing it all right, but the outcomes weren't what I expected. So I thought you were supposed to go and get an education and then take a job in the field that you've been trained for, and then you would have a reasonably economically prosperous life, or at least one where you felt you were kind of moving forward. You worked hard and were moving forward. And they were very much saying, but it's not working that way. It's just not working that way at all. And so that sense of being a little bit flabbergasted or perplexed, disappointed, really came through very strongly. And I'd say that I guess the other one thing that came across very, very strongly was this sense of detachment from the political process. They weren't sort of saying, yes, but my politicians will take care of that. I can talk to them. I kind of know what to do. It was like, I don't even know how to get engaged in that process. And every time I do, it feels as though kind of nothing happens. So perplexed and disengaged, sheepish about it. They weren't saying, oh, I'm disengaged from this ridiculous show. It was like, I know I should be involved, but I don't even know where to start.
Before diving deeper into this, how do you define resilience?
Well, I define it mainly as the ability to withstand and bounce back from sort of adverse outcomes, right? So a nuclear reactor is resilient as if you have a tidal wave and it doesn't blow up and melt down and destroy a whole community like Yokoshima did. That wasn't, unfortunately, kind of resilient. So it's easy for any system to function while everything is going the way we'd expect things to go. The question is, when things go wrong, is it resilient? So it's often only after things go wrong, right? World Trade Center, little did people realize that all the redundancies all the redundant fiber and cable and everything ran under the World Trade Center, right? So we might have had triple redundancy, but it actually wasn't. The telecommunications infrastructure actually wasn't resilient because there was this focal point that happened to be under the place that the unexpected adverse event happened. So one example, though, of resilience, the resilience of democratic capitalism, would be the Great Depression in the U.S. It was a worldwide Great Depression, but in the U.S., the United States stuck with democratic capitalism, right? They didn't give up on it. There was a leftward movement. Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration moved the political sphere kind of leftward, but we stayed with democratic capitalism. In a number of European countries and Japan, there was experimentation with other kinds of economic systems that weren't particularly good for the world or their population. I would say the democratic capitalism wasn't as resilient in those countries, in Germany, Austria, Japan, for example.
It's very interesting how you contrast resilience with efficiency. And that's where more is not better. So more of efficiency hurts resilience. Do we have to think of them as opposites?
I'm not so much opposites, I don't think, Yulia, although it's a tricky balance. To me, it's more an idea of kind of striking a balance that gets us, I think we can strike a balance that gets us all the efficiency we actually need and resilience. So it's not that kind of trade-off, which is, well, we just have to be grotesquely inefficient in order to have resilience. No, we just have to be a little more thoughtful about it and not imagining that we are more efficient when we really aren't. So one of the things I point out in the book is that we use proxies for efficiency that really are not helpful proxies, right? Is it more efficient to have the absolute minimum number of labor hours on the retail floor, right? It may feel like it. It may be, well, we got our labor hours down 10% by making sure we took off people kind of wandering around the store helping customers. That may feel efficient, but if sales per square foot in your store are lower because it's a miserable experience and people don't want to come into the store because they can't find anything because nobody can help them, and then they have to have a big lineup to check out, then you can think it was efficient, but at a more meta macro level, it was horribly inefficient. So it's more those sort of proxies for efficiency that aren't very well thought through, or sort of holistic proxies that I'm more kind of going after.
Balancing efficiency with resilience is what works. How did you come to this conclusion?
Yeah, it really was by studying, I guess, the way I tend to study things, which is I try to understand a phenomenon and explain why we're seeing things that we don't expect. Right? That's always my greatest interest is when there's a model that we have and are deploying a model, and we say this model will give us this, and then, if it doesn't give us this thing we thought, I get very interested to say, well, and often the first response is to say, we weren't applying that model well enough, right? So I have a relatively long history of saying stock-based compensation doesn't work. Literally, stock-based incentive compensation actually doesn't work. Most of the people out there who are observers of it would say, yes, Roger, there are real problems, and it doesn't seem to work as well as we think, and it has these adverse effects. You're right, but we're just not doing it right. If we had more longer term incentives and all of this stuff, and I'm like, no, actually, the whole philosophy behind it is fundamentally flawed. So you can keep on tweaking your stock-based compensation till the proverbial cows come home, but it's not going to be any better. So in this case, I just kind of tried to understand why, since 1976 in America, when America was really, really doubling down on efficiency in many respects, the Washington Consensus on trade and shrinking the size of government and opening up markets and deregulating, all of this stuff was all supposed to make the economy just fly, just hum. And it wasn't, right? It wasn't. So I had to figure out why, and that's just the conclusion I came to after trying to solve this mystery. But I did not go into it with that as a hypothesis. Actually, it was just my only going in view was, boy, there seems to be this disconnect between economic growth and growth of median family income. That's odd. Why, when it worked the way it worked for so long, is it working differently now? Why? And I just followed that and pulled the proverbial thread until I came to the conclusion that I talked about in the book.
What's very interesting is that we still like to follow models. We are still in love with best practices. And as you said, when you are not implementing those best practices to perfection, the way they were described by someone else, we believe it's our fault that we didn't implement them right. And that's where we went wrong. What can practically organizations, leaders, even individuals do different? What's the different view that they can take on this?
Well, I guess I just think having this sort of supreme confidence in models is something that they should think more about. So just because somebody says, here is the model that I believe we should use for doing X, whatever X is, for compensating executives, for staffing a store, we should be much more vigilant when that model does not deliver on its promise. And I think kind of much earlier on in the thinking process, we should entertain the possibility that the model is just plain wrong, that it is utterly flawed. If the model is producing exactly what we thought, I'd say, don't spend a whole lot of time thinking. Just go do it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But if there's a gap, and would I toss every model out the minute it doesn't work the way it purported to? No. There's always stochastic variation in everything in life. But I just file it away and say, that was supposed to do that. It didn't. Okay. Let's just keep a watching brief on that. I have a little checklist now that says didn't work once, and if it doesn't work again, what I don't know who told me this first. Some teacher told me, kind of one data point can just be a random chance event. 2 data points makes a line. So if I get 2, I start asking. So that's what I would say. Now it's a scary thought to many. Many people just depend on their models and trust their models to a great extent. There aren't nearly as many people in the world who are game to build a new model when whatever they wished was happening isn't happening on the basis of the given model. So I know it's scary for people, but I do think leaders are going to have to do that to a greater extent in this complex adaptive world that we now have.
So be more intentional when they use models and actually reflect on them.
Intentionality, Yulia, is a very, very good word. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the level of intentionality in the world is not high enough, and that'll create suboptimalities, and lots of them.
Maybe it's all the noise and the lack of slack and time that we have to actually be intentional about everything that we are doing. And we just take things for granted and we just follow what happens, what
Yeah.
someone else did and worked perfectly for them.
Though on the not having much time thing, Yulia, I can hear the voice of my most beloved academic mentor, Chris Argers, who passed away about a decade ago. He would always tell me, Roger, all action is designed. So when somebody complains, oh, I'm so horribly busy, I've got too much on my plate, I don't have time for anything. Chris, if you told that to Chris would say, oh, so how is it that you've made a set of decisions that have gotten you busy so that you complain about busyness, but continue to make the same decisions that keep you busy? Right? So he would never let you off the hook. He'd say, you've designed your busyness. And he would say the number one reason that people design busyness is it's exculpatory. They then can say to everybody, Yulia, I had so much on my plate. I know I didn't get what you wanted me to do done in time, but all these other things, so busy. So they just use it as an excuse. And Yulia, hey, you're supposed to say, oh, poor Roger, you are so busy. I understand that you didn't get the thing done that I really needed. But Chris just says, no, you designed your life to produce that. And so either redesign it, or stop complaining about it.
There are 5 things that you mentioned in the book: efficiency, pressure, perfectionism, connectedness, and megastructures. Should we think of them as vulnerabilities of any system or just of the democratic and capitalist systems?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess I wouldn't go that far to say it's of every system. There are really simple kind of cause and effect loops at work in some things, right? If you feed your dog at 6 a.m. every day, guess what? It's going to come, sniffing at your bedside at 6 a.m. looking for its food. This is not a complex system. It's adaptive, right? But it's not terribly complex. But I think when it comes to the economy, I think thinking of it as this complex adaptive system where you've got to balance efficiency and resilience, you can only tweak it. There are no perfectible. It's not perfectible. It's just it adapts, and you just can tweak it. I think for that, it's the best way to think about it. And I mean, I would say, as I delved into it, like I wasn't, before the 6 years at the start of this project, I was not a huge complex adaptive systems guy, right, by any stretch. But as I dove deeply into it, as I understood more and more how important that was for the work, it really struck me that if you don't think of adaptation, you're going to be disappointed, right? So. And I always knew this from studying compensation systems. I wrote a book called Fixing the Game, I guess, 10 years ago, about compensation systems. And adaptation was a big thing in that book, which is that we put in place compensation systems sort of thinking that it'll only change behavior in ways we want. I mean, think about that. Right. So I put in a compensation system for Yulia, saying, Yulia, if you can make this sales target, I'll pay you a mountain of cash at the end of the year. And then we imagine that you will engage in activities to get that mountain of cash. But we don't imagine that next year you will spend the first 2 months of the year negotiating with me to make sure your sales target is as low as possible so that you can make your compensation. Right? That's adaptation. You are facing a system where I'm saying very explicitly, the only way I think Yulia is actually going to give her best is to pay her a mountain of cash as an incentive. And I somehow don't want you to do anything but exactly what I want you to do. That's nuts, right? That's insanity, right? But we do it sort of ignoring the adaptation, it turns out that there are hundreds of millions of person hours spent every year with people negotiating targets, right? Rather than serving customers, they're negotiating targets. What does that do to help customers? Nothing, right?
Zero.
But that is the nature of adaptability. So I would say, coming out of the 6 years of research, I have been my kind of awareness and concern about adaptation, and in what way are we driving adaptation we would like versus adaptation we would not like. The adaptation that we would not like in the scenario I've painted is Yulia spending 2 months of the year negotiating rather than serving customers. So I have to ask myself, how do I have to behave as your boss in this scenario so that I get adaptation that I like rather than adaptation that I really don't like?
Maybe we think too simplistically about things. And for sure, we use the proxies that we were just talking about and the surrogate measurements and so on, and we introduce those in KPIs and we expect something to happen, but we don't really think of the connections and how that would affect other behaviors and other people and thinking processes and mindsets and all of that. So we don't see the whole complexity. Is there a way to understand complexity in an easier way, not a simple way, but in an easier way, and that understand what kind of consequences our behaviors and our decisions have?
Yeah. Yes and no, Yulia. So this is maybe one of the sobering kind of aspects of the book, which is you cannot wish it away, and complexity is there. So simplifying it is just not. There's huge dangers to simplifying it. You can end up being simplistic. But what I would say is that for me, the answer is a process answer, right? It's just stop thinking that you can figure it out entirely. So free your mind of the need to do that. So that'll be freeing, and then instead think of tweaking it. Think of that your entire life. So let's say you Leah, given your background, you run the HR department of some kind of medium-sized firm that has thousands of employees, and you've got to create a compensation system for that 2,000 people. Let's just say for sake of argument. So the advice I'd be giving you is, Yulia, recognize that whatever system you put in place, it will be gamed. And so it won't actually do precisely what you would have hoped, because that never happens. Recognize that there are interdependencies that you will not be able to figure out. You didn't realize that the outbound sales and manufacturing employees actually had a bigger link than you thought. Depending what the outbound salespeople sell, manufacturing will have shorter or longer runs or more customization. It's hard to figure that out in advance. So just assume that you can't get it all figured out, and make sure that your system is adaptable. So don't go to your employees and say, we're putting in this system and it's going to be this system for the next 5 years. So get ready for it. And this is the way it's going to be. Say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to serve our customer well, continue to grow the business, so we provide more well-paying jobs for more people and more happy customers. That's why I'm compensating you this way, assuming that is consistent with our goals. But you know what? We're all going to watch and see, and I'll ask you at the end of the year, when we see what's happening, did the compensation system actually cause some problems that raised, and what can you and I do to tweak that? It would be more that process attitude that just says, I cannot achieve perfection, so let's not promise perfection, let's not attempt perfection, but let's put in place a system whereby we reflect on what happened and constantly tweak it and tweak and tweak and tweak, and never feel terrible about it not working properly. Right? You would know this from HR, right? You design a compensation system, and then you can be shattered, right? That it didn't work exactly the way you thought. I thought so hard. We worked so hard, and it didn't work. Don't just assume that you cannot do it. You cannot do it, but you can always make it a little bit better every year.
That's a big change in mindset.
Yes, it is.
And I know you know it as well. Not to strive for perfection from the get-go, but actually tweak.
Yeah, tweak. So I'll tell you a little story about the Rotman School. When I was dean of the Rotman School, there was a professor, it's still there, named David Beatty, who won the students kind of award for Professor of the Year more times than anybody else. And I am always interested in positive outliers. And so I kind of went to David, who was a friend, he was a terrific guy, and said, David, kind of what do you do? Why are you so much of an outlier? Because you wouldn't necessarily expect it from him. He's not the absolutely most charismatic guy, the most entertaining guy, whatever. And he gave me the simple way. He said, well, Roger, I say he teaches a second year course, and that's 13 2-hour sessions. And he said, I poll the students at the end of every year and ask which was their least favorite of the 13 sessions. And I say, okay. And then what do you do? I said, well, I automatically eliminate that one and replace it with something that I hope does better. Okay. And then what? And he said, well, I just do it again next year. And sure, over time, of course, the worst session of the 13 from a student value gets weeded out, and the average quality just rises and rises until such time as he's the most outstanding professor. When you think about it, man, oh man, is that ever simple, right? Like, is that complicated? Is that super hard to do? No, but David has to make sure that he doesn't fall in love with every one of the 13 sessions, right? If he does that, then he will say, oh, the students are wrong. That's a great session. Like he wouldn't necessarily say, well, I'm going to stop trying to teach the thing I was teaching in the one that they hated most. He'll say, boy, I didn't teach it in a way that that really did it for them. So I better figure out a better way to do it. So David Beatty tweaking his course by 1/13, right? That's sort of an 8% tweak every year, made him the most outstanding in his field. That's doable.
We spoke about efficiency, resilience, about perfectionism. Let's talk about a bit connectedness versus separation, because that's very interesting. We get to be more and more connected through our technology, through what we do. How can we build in that separation?
Yeah, I guess I just think most of these things, it's not that difficult as long as you recognize the value of the two, right? So I think it is arguable that over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we have stopped thinking that separation has any value. And just think about it. What's the enormous enthusiasm over IoT, the Internet of Everything, right? I mean, it's going to change everything, and by doing what? Connecting more things together than have ever been connected before. Billions of devices. You've heard all the same hype, Yuli, as I have. What that just reflects to me is just this view that connecting things is an unalloyed good, right? And right, we've learned in COVID, is connecting everything an unalloyed good, having people freely traveling from country to country across borders uninhibited. Was that a good thing? No. Now we've done snip, snip, snip on a bunch of those things, and I've had my nose swabbed at least 30 times in the last 6 months as essentially people say there's a limit to connectedness here when we've got a virulent kind of a virus sweeping around the world. A little bit of separation is a good thing. So I think the main thing we have to do is just recognize that there are downsides to connectedness, and that'll start us thinking through the question of, well, kind of what would be a good separation, what would help, and we've learned this. We now have circuit breakers, right, in the stock markets, because what's a recognition that, wow, when a downward spiral starts, it can keep going of its own volition, especially with computer program trading, and so we'll just put a disconnect in there, and I think even the most sort of free market oriented capital markets person would say, nah, I like the New York Stock Exchange circuit breaker. I know it's regulation and I don't like regulation, but I think most of them would say otherwise we just get nutty outcomes that are in nobody's interest.
So we talk about too much efficiency and how that hurts us. Can there be too much resilience?
Sure.
And hurt us?
I think so.
How would that look like?
I think it would just be having a kind of so many buffers in systems that they barely function, right? I mean, I have good friends in Australia that I talk to regularly, and they worry that the Australian government is turning Australia into the hermit nation, right? By kind of like when they get 3 new cases, they call it an outbreak, right? When America has 30,000 new cases, they say maybe we got something happening here, which may be too far on the other side. But that would be what they're saying is there's no travel, there's no you got to quarantine if you leave the country and come back. So we're getting separated from the world. Well, that's to attempt to make Australia kind of resilient, but I would argue it's resilience in a more narrow sense, and really deep resilience is figuring out how to both participate in the global economy and not be overwhelmed by coronavirus. So it's interesting how these things
maybe even see the opportunities and get better.
You asked me about Frederick Winslow Taylor earlier on. I mean, it wasn't that he was nuts, right? Although there's a lot of evidence that says he was cheating on his experiments, or W. Edwards Deming, which I talk about in the book. But people just take a good thing and take it too far. I think you and I can agree, Yulia, that ice cream is good, but if all we ever ate was ice cream, both of us would be in trouble. So it's more taking things just past the point of diminishing returns, and you for sure could do that with resilience. You could build in a million fail safes and whatever, and have resilience and have a completely stagnant economy. We need the vibrancy that pushing for more efficiency gets us, but not take it too far.
You have implemented all of this thinking into the Rotman School of Management in Canada. What can we learn from what you've done on balancing efficiency with resilience in integrative thinking? What can we learn from what you have done so more universities even more schools, more organizations start introducing this into their curriculum?
Well, you give me, with that statement, you give me more credit than I would take. I wish I could say that all of the thinking from my various books was integrated into the Rotman School. I tried. but it's very hard. I come away from being dean for 15 years and then running a research center for another 6 years, so 21 years in the academy. I come away saying it is a very difficult place to change, very difficult, and I think I did change it, but every academic administrator, every university president or dean of a faculty has a real challenge in bringing about change of the sort that I think we need in the academic system. It's a hard slog. It is 15 years of the hardest work I've done in my career. So it was harder than whenever I did in the 17 years of my career before becoming dean, and in the time since is changing an academic institution.
For those who are trying to do this, can you maybe, I don't know, share 2 or 3 of the main roadblocks and how you overcame them?
Sure.
So that they have a sort of, hey,
Sure.
This is possible.
Well, the things I did at the Rotman School that I would consider most successful on bringing about change would be one is growing, right? Growth greases the skids. We started out my time at the Rotman School with a $13 million budget, and we ended it with a $130 million budget. And you can just do a lot more with 130 than you can with 13, and you can take resources disproportionately into the new areas that you need to get into without taking resources away from anybody. I made a rule that I would not take resources away from anybody, because that's what causes them to fight and just fight and be adversarial. And so they may have been. It's possible that some were jealous that this other area, like integrative thinking, was getting all this brand new money, but at least it wasn't taking their money. That would be one thing that I would advise anybody that's trying to bring about change. A second thing I would say is that there are lots of friends outside the university that you can help or get the help of, I should say. And so one of the things I did was have us reach out to a much greater extent to both the business community and the public policy community and do good things for them. And they rewarded us back. The business community came in and taught classes. They hired our students. Public policy makers got themselves involved in the public policy work we did. They helped fund various things that we did. And so if you just think of yourself like universities think of themselves as a place apart, right? We're the place apart where you can go and contemplate these bigger issues. There's a real value to that. Right, having the space to do original creative work, but don't take that too far because you can get a whole lot of help in your mission from the folks outside. And the other thing I would say to anybody trying to bring about change is that don't think too much in aggregates. I have to change the school, or I have to change the finance faculty. Think one-on-one, right? What I did as dean is I endeavored to have this one-on-one relationship with each of the professors. I spent time with each of the professors to understand what they cared about, what motivated them, and that gave me the best chance to figure out how what I wanted to do aligned with what they were interested in. At an aggregate, it's hard to tell that. At the micro level, it was easier to say, well, that's interesting. You want to do kind of this? Boy, I want to get this accomplished too. How could we provide research funding for that? How could I get you connection to the business community that would get you data that would support that? So So even though your goal as a dean or a president of a university or a provost is macro, the way to get at it is more micro. Good question. Nobody's asked me that question before, so I had to think about my experiences. Various people ask me, they say you should write a book about being a dean, and maybe I will someday. I don't know.
If we work at this in parallel, right? Individuals, organizations, system-wise, education organizations, and we try to balance efficiency and be more balanced in what we do overall. How long would it take us to save democracy? Would we be late? Can we do something to hurry things up? Is it good to hurry things up? So because it takes humans a lot of time to change.
No, it does. I mean, I guess I'm an optimistic person, Yulia. So maybe I'm unrealistic, but I'm optimistic that it is for sure not too late. And I think if we just start sort of with a recognition of that we've gone overboard on efficiency and start thinking about tweaking the system, government saying I'm gonna not make legislation permanent, but I'm going to view everything as tweaking. Businesses stop with the reductionism and the like. I honestly think that this can be turned, and I don't think we're in crisis mode yet, and human beings, in my experience, they just want things to be heading in the right direction. Human beings are more patient than we'd think. I think the great revolutions of the world, where the populace, kind of rises up and throws off its masters, had one thing in common, right? Which is lack of hope in progress, right? Whether that was French for the French Revolution, Russians for the Russian Revolution, Sandinistas, wherever there's no hope. Nothing is getting better. We don't see a path forward. So we are going to overthrow the system because that's the only thing to do. If instead there's progress towards a goal, people will hang in there and say, okay, at least we're heading in the right direction. I wish it could be faster. What can I do to make it faster? Maybe you'll, badger the politicians to make it faster. I think that's where we're at. But I do see signs of, if I just look again, I studied the U.S. more closely. The U.S. There's a little bit of a just burn it down, right? I think you can argue that several of the recent elections have been burn it down elections. And I think Brexit was burn it down. It was like, let's just get rid of this thing. Things aren't going the way we want. Brexit must be Brexit, or must be the EU. Let's do Brexit. So those are, what they say in naval warfare, warning shots across the bow. So we better get at it. But if we get at it, I have great confidence that we can start marching our way away from the cliff and to safer territory.
Roger, I do want to spend 3-4 minutes on talking about the Good Jobs Institute, because I feel that this is an action you are already taking to balance, to keep the balance between efficiency and resilience, to keep the balance between perfection and improvement. Something that you have started to actually show that, hey, if we have better jobs, we have more engaged people, they contribute more to the economy, they contribute to keeping democracy in place. So we are showing that something is moving in the right direction. It's a one step forward. Can you tell us a bit more about the Good Jobs Institute and how it functions? What kind of actions you have?
Absolutely. No, I'm thrilled with the Good Jobs Institute. So first and foremost, this is the brainchild of Zeynep Ton, who wrote the Good Job Strategy book. She's an MIT Sloan professor. And I loved her. I was introduced to her, loved her book, and kind of talked her into creating this institute because I said, people, the book is awesome, but I know from my previous experience, right, with Mike Porter and competitive strategy, an awesome book, but that awesome book did not translate into action. People needed help to say, hey, how do I do this stuff in competitive strategy? So I'd seen this movie before, and I said, they're going to say, I love this book, and then say, but what do I do? And so we should have a nonprofit institute. It's a nonprofit institute that will help anybody interested in putting in place the good jobs strategy. It'll help them do it. So we work with companies, little ones, big ones. We've worked with Sam's Club and Walmart, for example, and some of the things that Walmart has done to raise wages dramatically. They point out themselves, we did this because of the work we did with Zeynep Ton and the Good Jobs Institute. So any company that wants to figure out how to have kind of happier employees, that are more productive employees, that help their business grow and make the world a better place, they should contact the Good Jobs Institute. And we are set up to help them. And we've just we've gotten foundation grants that have helped fund us. I mean, we asked the companies to contribute, but we've got some good funding, and so we are expanding. But I think you should have Zeynep on your podcast. She is terrific thinker, a terrific human being, and I think she's going to go down as one of the most important business school professors of her generation.
We would definitely invite her.
And our goal, by the way, is to convert 10 million bad jobs into good jobs. 10 million, that's our goal.
That's a good goal. Actually, if that would happen, I mean, I know there's still this statistic that says that 70% of us are unhappy with what we're doing, and we're considering that we are in the bad jobs. And so it would be good to help change that statistic. And I think worth mentioning is, because working in HR, there's always this fear that people, all they want is salaries. But the Good Jobs Institute is not just about salaries and finance. Mm-hmm. It's about way more.
No. I mean, way more. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I do think that that part of it is a living wage, but you could. I would argue that you could, at some of these retailers, for example, I think you could double wages and you would have a modest improvement in people's feelings about the job. Like if you kept on having, like, you'd be amazed, Julia. Even though you're an HR person, you'd be amazed at in some of these retailing and fast food and the like, how terrible the shift management is. So let's imagine you're a single mom with two little babies at home working at one of these big retailers. You would not be told with a week's notice that you're going to be shifting to the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. You'd be told that 3 or 4 days in advance. Oh, by the way. And then you have to figure out, how do I have somebody to watch my babies at home? You'd be worrying about your babies at home, not serving customers or stocking shelves or whatever you're supposed to do. So one of there are many things we're doing, but one is just you've got to completely overhaul how you roster your people. Like Costco is our sort of, our shining example of it. Costco would never give you less than a month's notice if there were any kind of change to your normal shift, and then it would be kind of a negotiation as opposed to this you're fired unless you do this. So you're right. There's a whole bunch of things. Cross training is one. People don't want to do exactly precisely the same thing every day, or very few people do. They would like to have a variety of things. So you're absolutely right. Salaries are one piece of a complex puzzle. of happiness, and I just don't think companies have made it a big enough goal to have happy, fulfilled employees.
I have one last question, Roger. What are you currently unhappy
Yes.
about, and what is going to be the next improvement, whether that's in the form of a book or changing the way a business school works or changing how democracy and capitalism work? What are you unhappy about, and what's next on the list of, let's see how this works, can I do something about it?
Well, yeah, I talk about it. I talk about it a bit in the book, but I'm increasingly worried about the takeover of science and scientific reasoning in spheres that it shouldn't be involved in. Right. So, and I didn't come up with this. Aristotle did 2,500 years ago, but he pointed out, right, he invented the scientific method. It was formalized by Bacon, Newton, Descartes, Galileo 2,000 years later, but he laid it out. But he pointed out, he said, the method that I've created, which is the scientific method where you analyze data from the past, is for what he called the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. So this is that part of the world. If I let go of this, what'll happen? It'll fall. It fell last week. It'll fall next week. It'll fall 100 years from now. That's part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. There's a universal force called gravity, and it pushes things down. What he said is, in that part of the world, analyze the past to determine what to do, right? Because whatever you find out in the past is going to be the same as the future. But the greatest scientific thinker of all time, and the guy who invented the scientific method, said, but there's another part of the world. There's a part of the world where things can be other than they are. Take this part of the world. How many of these were in existence in 1999? The answer is 0. The first smartphone came into existence in 2000 with a BlackBerry. How many of these are there now? 4.4 billion. That's a part of the world where things not only can be, but they are different than they are. And what he said is, do not use my scientific method in that part of the world. Interesting, Yulia? It wasn't like, be careful with how you use it. Don't use it. And why? It's because if you analyze data from the past, what would be smartphone demand? 0. 0, because there aren't any. And so nobody thinks they need one. Nobody's nervous if it's more than an arm's length away that you have to be tied to this now your entire life. All that data would not be representative of the future. And so as science has taken over business to a greater and greater extent, and economic policy making, it's violating fundamentally what Aristotle warned against. He said, don't do that. You know what he said for that part of the world? You must imagine possibilities and choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. And that's what we need to do a lot more of. Imagine possibilities and then make them come true. And if we did that, the world would be a better place. If instead we analyze everything and only do what the analysis shows us, we will be trying to replicate the past in the future. And that's a bad idea. So that's what I'm working against.
Thank you so much, Roger, for your time, and thank you so much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure, Yulia. Anytime, and have Zainab Tan on your show.
Perfect. We will make sure to invite her, and then we will send you definitely the episodes and everything.